She pointed at him like he was nobody, like he was less than nobody. In front of 50 people, in front of cameras, in front of men in suits, who never got their hands dirty a day in their lives. Victoria Hale looked at a grease-stained mechanic and laughed. "Fly this jet, then we'll talk." And he said yes. The laughter stopped. What happened next in that hangar didn't just silence a crowd. It unraveled 11 years of secret sacrifice and a grief so deep it had nearly buried one man alive. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this one hits you, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming. The morning started the way all bad mornings do, too fast, too loud, and with no mercy for the unprepared. Caleb Reed was already on his back under the belly of a Cessna Citation when his phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. He didn't reach for it. He knew who it was. Owen's school had been calling every Tuesday since the boy's teacher decided that needs improvement in social engagement was code for something worth worrying about. It wasn't. Owen was 9 years old, quiet and brilliant. He didn't need to engage. He needed people worth engaging with. Caleb slid out from under the aircraft, wiped a smear of hydraulic fluid from his forearm with a rag that was dirtier than his arm, and stood up straight. 6'1", broad shoulders that had never quite lost their shape even after 11 years of crawling under planes instead of flying them. His face was the kind of face that said very little unless you knew how to read it, and most people didn't. He was 44 years old. He worked at Hargrove Aviation, a private airfield 40 minutes outside of Chicago, where the wealthy kept their toys and the men like Caleb kept those toys from falling out of the sky. His pay grade reflected which category the company thought mattered more. He called Owen back on the walk to the break room. "You eat something this morning?" he asked before the boy could say hello. "I had a granola bar." "That's not food." It said nutritious on the wrapper. "So does dog food." Caleb poured himself coffee from a pot that had been sitting since 5 a.m. and tasted like it knew that. "There's eggs in the fridge. Scrambled is easy. 2 minutes." "Dad, I'm gonna be late." "Then you'll be late and you'll have eaten eggs. You want to talk about what Mrs. Calloway said?" A pause, the particular silence of a 9-year-old deciding whether honesty was worth the conversation that followed. "She said I don't talk enough during group projects." "Do you have anything to say during group projects?" Another pause. "Not really." "Then you're being efficient." Caleb drank the bad coffee. "Not every room needs your voice, Owen, but your body needs eggs. Deal." He heard the fridge open on the other end of the line. A small smile crossed his face. Nobody would have seen it. He was alone. "Dad." "Yeah." "Can we look at that P-51 book tonight, the one about Tuskegee? After homework?" "Obviously after homework." "Don't obviously me. Go make your eggs." He hung up and stood there for a moment with the bad coffee and the quiet. This was the best part of every day, the 10 seconds after talking to Owen, where the world felt like it had a reason to keep turning. Then Diego Vargas stuck his head in the break room door and ruined it. "Reed, you see the circus out front?" Caleb didn't need to ask what circus. He heard it before he saw it, the elevated pitch of too many voices in a space not designed for crowds, the clipped authority of someone accustomed to being heard immediately, and underneath it all, the specific silence of men pretending they weren't nervous. He walked out of the break room and into the main hangar. Hargrove Aviation's primary bay was a large, high-ceilinged space where the serious aircraft lived, the ones that cost more than most people's neighborhoods. In the center of the bay, looking like it had been dropped there by God to make everyone feel small, sat a Gulfstream G700. Clean white fuselage gold trim along the wing line. The kind of aircraft that didn't fly you somewhere so much as deliver you. It belonged to Hale Industries. Caleb knew the name. Everyone in aviation knew the name. Victoria Hale had taken her late father's mid-sized defense contracting company and turned it into something that now had contracts with 3 federal agencies, a fleet of 6 private aircraft, and a reputation for moving fast, and tolerating zero delays. She was on the cover of business magazines. She gave speeches at universities about disruption and vision and the audacity of execution, which Caleb privately thought was a lot of words for "I want things my way and I get them." No. He had never met her. He'd worked on 2 of her company's smaller aircraft maintenance checks. Nothing remarkable. He'd hoped to keep it that way. He saw her the moment he walked in. Victoria Hale was standing in the center of the hangar floor with the particular posture of someone who understood instinctively that posture was power. Mid-40s, sharp-featured, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse, hair back, jaw set. She was surrounded by 4 people, 2 men in suits, 1 woman with a tablet, and a younger man in a pilot's uniform, who was keeping a very specific distance from her, which Caleb recognized as the distance of someone who had recently delivered bad news and was still assessing the fallout radius. That younger pilot was talking. Victoria was not listening. She was looking at her watch. Caleb started to turn around. "You." He stopped. He wasn't sure she was talking to him. He turned back slowly. She was looking directly at him. Her eyes traveled from his boots to his face with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to sizing up assets. What she saw: work boots, dark coveralls, with reed stitched above the chest pocket, a hydraulic fluid stain on his left forearm, and a coffee cup that had seen better decades. "Yes, you," she said. "Come here." He walked over, not quickly, at his own pace. "Can I help you?" he said. "My chief pilot just collapsed." She said it the way someone says my car got a flat tire. A logistical problem, not a human one. "Ambulance took him 20 minutes ago. I have a government meeting in Washington at 2 o'clock that cannot be rescheduled. I need a pilot." "You should call your pilot service." "I did. Their available qualified pilots are 4 hours out. I need someone now." She looked at him again. Still the quick assessment. Still the conclusion. "Do you fly?" Caleb looked at her for a moment. "I'm a mechanic." "That's not what I asked." Around them, the hangar had gotten quieter. Caleb was aware of it. Diego standing by the tool rack, 2 of the line crew near the G700, the suited men watching. The woman with the tablet had looked up. "I asked if you fly," Victoria said again, sharper this time. "I know what you asked." "I know what you..." Her chin came up. Something in her expression shifted the particular recalibration of a person who was not used to being answered slowly. "Your company is on a service contract with Hale Industries worth..." She looked briefly at the tablet woman who supplied the number with the fluency of someone who quoted it often, 460,000 annually. "I think the least you can do is give me a straight answer." Caleb looked at the G700. Then he looked back at her. "No?" he said. "I don't fly." He started to turn, and then she did it. Later he would think about what made her say it. Frustration. Pressure. The particular arrogance of someone who had never in their adult life been told no by a person in work coveralls and been forced to accept it. Maybe she simply could not resist. Maybe it was just who she was when she was cornered. "Fly this jet." Her voice came out loud enough to carry across the hangar, and there was something theatrical in it, something that was performing for the room as much as addressing him. "Then we'll talk." Laughter. Not big, not cruel. Just the reflexive, released laughter of a group of people who had been tense and suddenly had somewhere to put it. The 2 line crew guys. One of the suited men. Even the young first officer who probably regretted it immediately. The sound of it hit Caleb somewhere specific. Not his pride. He'd made peace with pride a long time ago. Something else. Something that lived lower and older. He stopped walking. He turned around. The laughter was fading. People were already looking away, already moving on. This was the moment in the natural order of things where the man in the coveralls looked at the floor and walked away. Caleb looked at the G700. He looked at Victoria Hale. "Okay," he said. The word landed flat and quiet in the hangar. "I'll fly it." Nobody laughed. The silence was so sudden it had texture. Victoria Hale stared at him. For the first time since he'd walked over, her expression was not a controlled thing. Something moved behind her eyes, not quite surprise, not quite discomfort. Uncertainty. The particular uncertainty of someone who has thrown a card they were sure would end the game and watched the other person pick it up. "Excuse me," she said. "You want the flight covered, I'll fly it." He said it the same way he'd say, "I'll replace the fuel filter." Matter of fact, no drama. "I need to make one call. Then I need 15 minutes to review the aircraft logs. Then we can go." "You're a mechanic." "You asked if I fly." "I asked rhetorically." "You asked." He said, "because you needed an answer. There's your answer." Her jaw tightened. She looked at the suited men. They looked back at her. Nobody offered anything. The young first officer stepped forward. His name tag read Hendricks D. He looked about 28, clean-cut, and deeply uncertain about what was happening. "Ma'am, I can't legally operate this aircraft without a qualified captain." "I know that, Daniel. And I don't know this man's—" "I know that too." She turned back to Caleb. He could see her working through it, the risk calculation, the alternative options, the diminishing time. The meeting in Washington was real. He didn't know what it was about, didn't need to. He could see it in the set of her jaw that missing it was not something she was prepared to do. "You have a pilot's license," she said. "I have what you need to get to Washington." That is not an answer. You want an answer or you want a pilot? Another silence. This one different. Charged. She held his eyes for a moment. Then, in a voice that was quieter than anything she'd said since he'd walked over just to him, "Not the room," she said. "If you are wasting my time, I will end your company's contract before we hit the runway." Caleb nodded once. "I'll need the maintenance logs." He handed his coffee cup to Diego, who was standing nearby with the expression of a man watching a movie he couldn't believe was real. "You serious?" Diego said quietly. "Make sure somebody checks the nose gear assembly on that Citation before she goes back up," Caleb said. "The right strut's showing wear." Caleb. "I'll be back tonight." He looked at Diego. "Don't let them skip the nose gear." He made one call. He stood outside the hangar door in the thin April morning, the wind off the airfield carrying the smell of jet fuel and cut grass, and he dialed. It rang 3 times. "Dad." Owen's voice. Surprised. "They didn't call during school hours." "Change of plans today," Caleb said. "I'm going to be home later than usual. You'll go to the after-school program, okay? I'll call Mrs. Patterson." "Where are you going?" Caleb looked up at the sky. It was low and gray with a ceiling maybe 4,000 feet, and a ridge of weather pushing down from the northwest that he'd already been tracking mentally without realizing it. "Work thing," he said. "Is it interesting?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, it's a little interesting." "Okay." Owen's voice was easy with it, the easy trust of a kid who had learned that his father meant what he said. "Dad." "Yeah." "The Tuskegee book. The part about Red Davis. Can we read that part specifically tonight?" "Yeah, go to class." "I'm going. Love you." "Love you too." He hung up and stood there one more second with the gray sky and the jet fuel smell, and something moving through him that he hadn't felt in 11 years. He didn't have a name for it yet. He wasn't going to look for one. He went inside and asked for the maintenance logs. He spent 12 minutes with those logs and learned more than most people learned from an hour with them. The G700 was well maintained. He'd give Hale Industries that. Service records, clean avionics, updated, no deferred items on the mechanical side. But there was a note in the navigation system calibration log that he flagged mentally, and a fuel burn deviation from the last flight that was within acceptable range, but on the outer edge of it, the kind of thing that didn't mean anything until it meant something. Way. He noted both. Filed them where he filed things in the back part of his mind, where the important details went and stayed until they were needed. Daniel Hendricks found him in the side office where he'd been reading. "Can I ask you something?" Hendricks said. He was trying to sound casual and not entirely succeeding. "Sure." "Who are you?" Caleb looked up from the log. "Caleb Reed. I'm on the maintenance crew." "That's your job? I mean..." Hendricks stopped, started again. "You read those logs like you've been reading logs for 30 years. "About that, yeah." Hendricks stared at him. "You're actually going to fly this aircraft. That's the plan. Can you fly a G700? Caleb set down the log and looked at the young man. Hendricks was good, he could already tell. Good posture, good instincts, smart enough to be asking the right questions, even if he didn't love the answers he was getting. "What's your total flight time?" Caleb asked. Hendricks blinked at the redirect. 3,100 hours. High performance time. 800, most of it in Citation and Phenom. I've got 140 in this airframe. Good, Caleb said. He stood up. You handle comms and systems monitoring. Call-outs by the book, everyone. Don't modify anything, don't improvise. If I tell you to do something and you don't understand why you do it first and ask second, clear. Hendricks opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You didn't answer my question. Caleb picked up the logs and tucked them under his arm. No, I didn't. He walked toward the flight line. She was waiting on the tarmac. The wind had picked up the northwest weather, moving faster than he'd estimated. He could feel it in the way it moved, that particular tension of air that was trying to get somewhere. He adjusted his mental picture of the departure routing without breaking stride. Victoria Hale was standing by the aircraft stairs with her two suited associates and the tablet woman. She had a phone to her ear and was speaking in that clipped, accelerated tone of someone conducting 3 conversations simultaneously. When she saw him come through the hangar door, she lowered the phone. He was wearing the same coveralls. He hadn't changed. She looked at him, then at the coveralls, then back at him. You're wearing that, she said. I don't have a uniform, he said. You want to leave or you want to discuss my wardrobe? One of the suited men, the taller 150s, the look of a former athlete who had traded the gym for conference rooms, started forward. Ms. Hale, I really think we should reconsider. Get on the plane, Franklin, she said. Franklin stopped, reconsidered, got on the plane. She was looking at Caleb, the calculation still running behind her eyes, the uncertainty she was trying not to show. If anything goes wrong, she started. Then it goes wrong, he said. The alternative is you miss your meeting. You've already decided this is worth the risk, or you wouldn't still be standing here. He met her eyes, steady, unhurried. You're not someone who stands still when they've already made a decision. So let's go. Something crossed her face. Something he didn't try to read. She turned and walked up the stairs. Caleb followed. The cockpit of a Gulfstream G700 is a place designed with a particular kind of intelligence, an understanding that the men and women who inhabit it are making hundreds of small decisions continuously, and that the environment must support that without overwhelming it. Every instrument has a reason. Every system has a logic. Caleb sat in the left seat and felt the shape of the aircraft around him. Hendricks slid into the right seat and began the pre-departure flow with professional precision. Caleb watched him without seeming to cataloging the quality of his habits. Good, clean, slightly mechanical textbook rather than intuitive, but that would come with time and experience. He had the fundamentals. Checklist, Caleb said. Starting, Hendricks said, and they began. The before-start checklist took 3.5 minutes. Caleb moved through it with the economy of someone for whom checklists were not a learning exercise but a confirmation. Each item verified not because he didn't know the answer, but because he respected the process enough to ask anyway. Every step. No shortcuts, Hendricks noticed. Caleb could see it in the slight shift of the younger man's posture, some tension releasing, some preliminary judgment being quietly revised. When the engines came to life, Caleb felt it in his hands before he heard it, that deep building authority of turbofan power, the aircraft waking up. Something in his chest responded to it. Not nostalgia. Something older and more structural than nostalgia. Like a door opening in a room he'd sealed off. He didn't have a name for that either. He requested taxi clearance from Hargrove Ground. The controller gave him the routing. He read it back without error, without hesitation. Hendricks glanced at him, said nothing. The G700 began to move. Victoria's voice came through the intercom as they reached the hold short line. "Mr. Reed, we're about to take off," he said. "Whatever it is, it can wait until cruise." A pause. I was going to say, another pause, shorter. "Are you ready?" He looked at the runway ahead. 4,000 feet of gray morning sky and wind at 14 knots from the northwest. "Yes," he said. He advanced the throttles. And Caleb Reed flew. It came back to him, not like a memory, but like breathing. Like something that had never actually left. Just gone quiet, gone still, waited in the dark, with the particular patience of things that are fundamentally true. His hands knew what to do, his eyes knew where to look. The calculations ran continuously in the background of his mind. Airspeed attitude, climb rate, the northwest weather system, the fuel burn deviation from the logs, the weight and balance he'd computed mentally while walking to the aircraft. All of it present, all of it ordered, all of it exactly where it needed to be. The wheels came off the runway. The aircraft climbed. Beside him, Daniel Hendricks called out the altitudes and the airspeeds. His voice was steady, professional. But at 8,000 feet, when Caleb made a precise fluid correction to account for wind shear that Hendricks hadn't fully registered yet, the young man stopped mid-call-out. Just for a second. Then he recovered and continued. But Caleb heard it. That half-second where Hendricks' training and Hendricks' eyes and Hendricks' understanding of what he was witnessing all arrived at the same moment and produced a silence that said very clearly, "Who are you?" Caleb climbed them through the weather layer, found the smooth air above it at 31,000 feet and leveled off. The ride went glassy. The engine hum settled into that even, purposeful tone that meant everything was working the way it was supposed to. He trimmed the aircraft. He looked out at the sky above the clouds, that absolute particular blue that only exists above weather, above noise, above all the complicated mess of life at ground level. He had forgotten in 11 years that the sky looked like this. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten. Maybe he'd just been too afraid to remember. He pushed the thought down, filed it with the other things he wasn't examining today. The intercom clicked. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice. Different now, the clipped urgency gone, something else in its register that he couldn't quite place. "Ms. Hale?" "How long to Washington?" "Wheels down in approximately 2 hours and 6 minutes. Weather's clear at Reagan. We'll have a smooth arrival." A pause. "You've done this before," she said. It wasn't really a question. Caleb looked at the sky. "Fly the jet," he said. "Once or twice." He clicked off the intercom. In the right seat, Daniel Hendricks kept his eyes on his instruments. But his jaw was set in the particular way of a young man who had just realized that the ground beneath his assumptions was much less solid than he'd believed. Outside 31,000 feet above the Midwest, the sky was the deepest, cleanest blue Caleb Reed had seen in 11 years. He kept his hands on the controls. And for the first time since Marcus Reyes died on a Tuesday morning, in a sky that looked nothing like this one, Caleb Reed was exactly where some deep and stubborn part of him had always known he was supposed to be. 31,000 feet is a different world. Not because of the altitude, Not because of the thin air or the cold that would kill you in minutes if the pressurization failed. It's different because down there on the ground, everything is noise and obligation and the weight of who people think you are. Up here, none of that reaches you. Up here, the only thing that matters is the aircraft, the weather, and the truth. Caleb had forgotten that. Mako. He hadn't meant to forget it. He'd just buried it under 11 years of crawling under planes instead of flying them. 11 years of oil changes and hydraulic checks and quarterly inspections. 11 years of making sure other people could get off the ground safely while he stayed exactly where he'd chosen to stay. On the ground. In the grease. Where a man who had made a catastrophic mistake and lost his best friend to the sky had decided he belonged. But the sky had a memory, and so did his hands. 37 minutes into the flight, Daniel Hendricks made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, the kind that escapes a person before they've decided whether they're going to say the thing or not. Caleb heard it and waited. Hendricks lasted another 2 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "You're going to anyway. Your scan pattern." Hendricks stopped, restarted. "I've flown with 6 captains in this airframe. Every one of them has a different way of working the cockpit. Some guys are all instruments, never look outside. Some guys are window watchers, barely trust the glass. You..." He stopped again, clearly working on how to say it. "Your scan is like you built a picture in your head before we left the ground, and you're just checking it every 30 seconds to see if anything changed." Caleb adjusted their heading by 2 degrees. Micro-correction, anticipating a wind shift the instruments hadn't registered yet. "That's one way to describe it," he said. "That's not a normal way to fly." "It's one way. Where did you learn it?" The question sat in the cockpit. Caleb let it sit. Outside at 31,000 feet, the cloud deck below them stretched to every horizon, white and flat and absolute, like the world had been simplified down to its essentials. Sky above, cloud below, altitude and airspeed and attitude, and the engine hum that ran through the seat and up through his spine. "School," he said. Hendricks looked at him sideways. "What school?" "The kind the government ran." Another silence. Hendricks processing this. Caleb could almost hear the recalibration happening in real time, the young first officer's mental model of the man in the left seat shifting, adjusting, trying to find a configuration that made sense. "Military," Hendricks said. "Air Force." "What did you fly?" Caleb was quiet long enough that Hendricks started to think he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Things that didn't have names yet." "Kai." The intercom clicked before Hendricks could respond. Victoria's voice came through, and there was a different quality to it than before. Less command, more question. Like a woman who had spent 40 minutes in the back of an aircraft being flown by a man she'd publicly mocked and was now doing the math on what that meant. "How are we looking?" she said. "On schedule," Caleb said. "Smooth air through descent. Reagan's clear. Good." A pause. Then carefully. "The turbulence earlier, when we climbed through the weather layer. You handled that." Another pause. "Efficiently." "That's the job." "Mr. Reed." Her voice changed, quieter. "I've flown 200 and some odd times in the last 3 years. I know what routine turbulence feels like, and I know what it feels like when a pilot's managing something they don't want you to notice. You were managing something coming through that weather layer." And he said nothing. "Wind shear," she said. It wasn't a question this time. "Brief encounter. Managed." "I know it was managed. That's my point." The intercom was quiet for a moment. Most pilots manage wind shear by telling the passengers in that very specific calm voice that means they're not as calm as they sound. "You didn't say anything." "No reason to." "Why not?" "Because there was nothing for you to do about it," he said. "Telling you would have scared you without giving you any way to help. The situation was already resolved. Information with no actionable application isn't information, it's just noise." The silence on the intercom lasted long enough that he thought she'd clicked off. Then she said, "Who taught you that?" He adjusted the throttle, slightly optimizing their fuel burn. Outside, a gap in the cloud deck below revealed a patchwork of brown and gray Midwestern farmland, 31,000 feet down, impossibly remote. "A friend," he said. He clicked off the intercom before she could ask the next question. Hendricks said nothing, but Caleb caught the look, quick sideways, professional enough not to linger. The look of a young pilot who was flying next to someone he didn't understand yet and was smart enough to know it. Good instinct, Caleb thought. Hold that. He'd been 28 once, sitting in a right seat next to a man who flew the way other people breathed without thinking about it, without performing it, just doing it because it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd spent a year trying to understand what made Marcus different before he finally figured out it wasn't a technique. It was a relationship. Marcus Reyes had made peace with the sky in a way that most pilots never did. He didn't fight the aircraft. He didn't manage it. He listened to it. "You have to feel what it's telling you," Marcus used to say, adjusting his gloves, pre-flighting some experimental machine that had no business being in the air. "The aircraft always knows something you don't. Your job is to stop being so sure you're smarter than it." Caleb hadn't understood that for 2 years. Then one morning, in an aircraft with no designation and a flight ceiling that wasn't in any manual, he'd understood it all at once, and the understanding had never left him. He'd called Marcus from the debriefing room. "I got it," he'd said. Marcus had laughed. Big, full the laugh of a man who was entirely comfortable taking up space. "Only took you 2 years slow. Not everyone's a prodigy, Jinx." "No," Marcus had said, still laughing. "Just me." Caleb's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the controls. He released the pressure deliberately, methodically, the way he'd learned to manage the things that tried to pull him off course. "Initiating descent in approximately 42 minutes, he said, and his voice came out level and clear. "Just information. Just the job." Hendricks confirmed it and went back to his instruments. Outside, the cloud deck below thinned, reformed, thinned again. The sky held them both without commentary. The aircraft flew. The clock on the panel read 9:41 a.m. In the back of the aircraft, Victoria Hale sat with a legal pad on her knee and a pen she hadn't been using, and she stared at the forward bulkhead of the cabin like it had something written on it she was trying to read. Franklin, the taller, suited man, was working through something on a laptop across the aisle. He glanced at her twice and had the experience and the wisdom not to say anything. The tablet woman whose name was Sophie, and who had worked for Victoria Hale for 3 years, and had therefore developed an acute sensitivity to every variation of her employer's silences, looked up from her own screen, once assessed the situation with one professional sweep, and looked back down. Victoria wrote 2 words on the legal pad. Then she crossed them out. Then she wrote them again. Then she put the pen down and pressed her fingers to her eyes and sat with the particular discomfort of a woman who had spent the better part of 2 decades being the smartest person in most rooms and was now at 39,000 feet above the American Midwest, unable to stop thinking about a man in coveralls. Yeah. Not the way the thought made her feel uncomfortable. The other kind of uncomfortable. The kind that came when you'd done something you couldn't undo, and the undoing was going to cost you. She picked up the pen. She wrote, "Who is he?" She looked at it for a moment. Then she called Sophie over. "I need you to find something out for me," she said, quietly. Sophie sat. "All right. The mechanic flying this aircraft. His name is Caleb Reed. He works maintenance at Hargrove Aviation. What do you need?" Victoria thought about the wind shear, the micro-correction at 8,000 feet. The way he'd read the maintenance logs, not read them the way you'd look at something you already knew and were verifying rather than learning. The scan pattern Hendricks had been trying to articulate. The quality of the silence in the cockpit when she'd been speaking to him, the specific quality of a man who was filtering what he chose to answer. "Everything," she said. Sophie nodded and opened her laptop. Victoria looked back at the bulkhead. The legal pad said, "Who is he?" She had a feeling she wasn't going to like the answer. Not because it would be bad, because it would change the shape of the morning in a way that made her look worse than she already suspected she looked. She'd built her career on being right. Being wrong was not something she spent time with. She moved past it, processed, pivoted, drove forward. But there was a particular quality to this kind of wrong that wasn't going to let her move past it quickly. She'd felt it the moment the laughter died in that hangar, the moment the word, "okay," landed in the silence, like a stone into still water. She'd laughed too, not loudly, but she'd laughed. She pressed her fingers to her eyes again. The aircraft flew. Hendricks called top of descent in 38 minutes. "Copy," Caleb said. In the back, Victoria Hale sat with her legal pad and her wrong feeling and waited for Sophie to find her an answer. It took 14 minutes. She knew from the way Sophie looked up from the laptop that the answer was not small. "Talk to me," Victoria said. Sophie glanced at Franklin. Victoria made a small gesture privacy. Franklin trained diplomat that he was found a very interesting reason to study something on his phone. Sophie turned the laptop to face her. "Caleb James Reed," Sophie said quietly. "Age 44, currently employed as a flight line mechanic at Hargrove Aviation, Chicago suburban area." Before that, she paused. The pause of someone who has found something that reorganized what they thought they were looking for. Before that, 12 years, United States Air Force. Test pilot program, Edwards Air Force Base. Victoria looked at her. "Test pilot," she said. "Not just test pilot." Sophie turned the laptop more squarely toward her. "This is a Department of Defense commendation from 2009. He's one of 7 pilots who flew the initial operational testing for the I can't read this designation. It's partially redacted, but it's described in an unclassified summary as an advanced experimental air superiority platform. He flew it at speeds and altitudes that—" Sophie stopped, started again. "The summary says he logged flight hours in conditions that at the time had only been achieved by 3 active-duty pilots in the U.S. military." Victoria said nothing. "There's more," Sophie said. "In 2012 there was an incident. 2 aircraft. An experimental mission, the details are mostly classified, but there's a summary in the accident investigation report that's partially available. He was flying lead. His wingman—" Sophie stopped again. Her voice had gotten quieter. "His wingman didn't come home." The cabin was very still. "He resigned 6 months later," Sophie said. "Honorable discharge, Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 air medals. He went—" She looked down. "He went to work as an aviation mechanic." Victoria Hale sat with that for a long moment. The aircraft moved under them smooth and level, the engine hum even and constant and perfectly managed. "How old was he when he resigned?" she said. Sophie checked. 33. 33 years old. 12 years of flying the edge of what was possible. A friend who didn't come home. And then 11 years of crawling under aircraft for a salary that Victoria Hale's company spent on monthly parking. She looked at the forward bulkhead again. She thought about the hangar, the crowd, the laughter. "Fly this jet, then we'll talk." Her own voice, her own performance ringing back at her. "Sophie," she said. "Yes, when we land, I want an accurate number on what Hargrove Aviation's maintenance staff are being paid. All of them." Sophie blinked. "All right. And pull the safety inspection records for our fleet. All 6 aircraft. Every deferred maintenance item from the last 18 months. Sophie was already typing. "And the pilot training logs." Victoria looked at her. "Why do you ask? You have the look—" Sophie said carefully, of someone who is about to find out several things are worse than they appear. Victoria turned back to the bulkhead. Pull the training logs, she said. The aircraft began in the faintest possible way to change its pitch. The engines adjusted, barely perceptible unless you were paying attention. But Victoria Hale had spent 20 years paying attention. She pressed the intercom. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Ma'am, are we descending?" "In 2 minutes, I'm setting it up." She took a breath. "Mr. Reed, when we land." "Ms. Hale." His voice, level, patient in the way of a man who was patient not because things didn't affect him, but because he'd decided not to let them run him. "We land first." The intercom clicked off. She sat back. Franklin had stopped pretending to look at his phone. He was watching her with the look of a man who had seen Victoria Hale in 100 difficult situations and knew that her face right now was wearing an expression he hadn't seen before. "You know what I think," he said. "No," she said. "And I don't need to." "I think," he said anyway, because he'd worked for her long enough to know she needed what she didn't think she needed, that the man flying this plane is going to be the most interesting conversation you've had in about 3 years. Victoria didn't answer. But she didn't tell him to stop talking either. The aircraft nosed down gently, and the descent toward Washington began. In the cockpit, Caleb worked the approach with the economy of absolute competence. Reagan National had a tricky approach: the Potomac, the restricted airspace, the specific noise abatement procedures that required precision in the pattern. Hendricks managed the radios, smooth and professional, and Caleb let him run it while he flew. At 6,000 feet, descending through broken cloud layers, the city appeared below them in fragments. The river. The monuments. The particular gray of a federal city on a spring morning. Caleb had seen it from this angle before. Years ago, on a different kind of mission. He didn't spend time with the memory. He had an approach to fly. "Gear down," he said. "Gear down." Hendricks confirmed, reaching for the selector. 3 green lights. "Flaps 15, Caleb said. "Flaps 15. The aircraft slowed and settled and became something different in his hands, heavier, more deliberate, committed now to the descent. Caleb felt the change and adjusted, leaning into it, letting the aircraft's character at this configuration inform his inputs rather than fighting it toward something else. This was what Marcus meant: listening. At 1,000 feet, Hendricks called stabilized. "Stabilized," Caleb confirmed. At 500 feet, the runway numbers materialized through the last thin haze of cloud. At 50 feet, he pulled power. The G700 settled onto the runway at Reagan National, with a touchdown so smooth that in the back of the aircraft, Sophie looked up from her laptop and realized they were already on the ground. Victoria looked at the window, then forward toward the cockpit door. She had a reputation for precision, for identifying assets, positioning them correctly, extracting maximum value. 20 years of it, a company built on it. She'd mocked this man in a room full of people. Caleb brought the aircraft to taxi speed and followed the marshaller's signals toward the ramp. He said nothing. Hendricks let out a breath that he'd been holding since the flare. Just one breath, slow and deliberate. Then, "Sir, I've never—" He stopped. "Don't overthink it," Caleb said. "You ran good radios. You flew that approach like Hendricks searched for it, didn't find anything adequate. Like you've been here before." "Once or twice," Caleb said. He parked the aircraft and began the shutdown sequence, his hands moving through it from muscle memory. Each switch in sequence, each system verified the same way he'd done it 1,000 times in aircraft that moved faster and climbed higher and cost the government more than this Gulfstream's manufacturer had ever dreamed. He did it without thinking about it, without performing it, just doing it because it was correct, and correct was the only way he knew. The engines spooled down. The cockpit went quiet. Outside, the city went about its morning. Hendricks sat in the right seat and didn't move. "Mr. Reed," he said finally. "Hendricks. I have to ask, and I know you're not going to want to answer, but I have to ask." Caleb finished the shutdown checklist and set down the card. "What are you doing working line maintenance at Hargrove?" Hendricks said. The cockpit held the question. "Yes." Outside, a ground crew was moving toward the aircraft with wheel chocks and a fuel truck. Somewhere in the cabin, Caleb could hear movement. Victoria, her people, preparing to disembark, preparing to step back into the world of meetings and contracts and consequence. Caleb looked out the window at the Washington sky, low clouds gray going white at the edges, a military transport in the pattern 3 miles east gear down. "I have a son," he said. Hendricks waited. "He's 9, Caleb said. "He builds paper airplanes. He can't sleep if I'm not in the house." He looked at the instrument panel rather than the window. When his mother left, he was 2 years old, and there was exactly one person in the world he needed to be able to count on completely. So I made a choice. The cabin door opened behind them, the sound of the jetway. "That's it," Hendricks said. Caleb picked up the maintenance log he'd brought with him and tucked it under his arm. "That's it." He stood up. "Does he know?" Hendricks said. "Your son. Does he know who you are?" Caleb paused, just for a beat, the question finding the exact place inside him that hadn't been looked at in 11 years. "He knows I'm his dad," he said. He opened the cockpit door and walked into the cabin. Victoria Hale was standing in the aisle coat on legal pad in her bag. She was looking at him with an expression that had shed every layer of the morning's performance and arrived at something underneath that was just real, direct. The face of a woman who had done something and understood what she'd done. Her people were filing off the aircraft. Franklin, the tablet woman Sophie, the 2 suited associates. Victoria didn't move. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Ms. Hale." He stopped in the aisle. "Your meeting. You don't want to be late." "I have 11 minutes." She looked at him. "Sophie found your service record." He said nothing. "I want you to know," she said, "that what I said in the hangar was what it was," he said. "It's done." "I know it's done. I'm telling you I know what it was." He waited. "I made you a joke," she said, "in front of people who work for me and work for your company, and—" She stopped. She was not. He could see a woman who apologized often or easily, which meant when she did it, it meant something. "I made you a joke, and you could have walked away. You had every right to walk away." "I know," he said. "Why didn't you?" The aircraft was quiet now, just the 2 of them in the aisle. He thought about Owen's eggs, about the gray sky and the jet fuel smell and the door opening in the sealed room and the blue above the clouds and Marcus's voice saying the aircraft always knows something you don't. "Because you needed a pilot," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, then she nodded once. Not acceptance, not absolution, just acknowledgement. The recognition of a woman who had learned at some cost what it looked like when a person operated from principle rather than ego. "When we're done here," she said, "I'd like you to come back to Chicago with us. I have some things I want to show you." "What things?" "What?" "Safety records," she said. "Maintenance pay scales, training logs." She held his eyes. "I want to know what you see." He looked at her, measuring something. Not her authority, or her wealth, or the particular pressure that radiated from people accustomed to getting what they wanted. Something else. Whether she meant it. He decided for now to operate on the assumption that she did. "I need to be home by 7, he said. "You'll be home by 7. He nodded. She turned and walked off the aircraft. Caleb stood alone in the aisle of a Gulfstream G700 on a Washington morning, and breathed. 11 minutes ago, he'd landed this aircraft for the first time. Years ago, he'd landed this aircraft for the first time in 11 years. He didn't know yet what that meant. But something had opened up there in the blue above the clouds that he wasn't sure he could close again. He wasn't sure he wanted to. He picked up the maintenance log and walked off the aircraft into the April air. The city was loud and cold and moving fast in every direction. He had a few hours to stand in it before the flight home. He took out his phone and looked at it. Then he put it away without calling anyone. Some things needed to be thought about before they were spoken. He walked. The flight back to Chicago left Reagan at 3:47 in the afternoon. Victoria had made her meeting. Whatever happened inside that federal building on Constitution Avenue, she came back to the aircraft 2 hours later with a different quality of quiet than she'd left with, not the pressurized silence of someone managing a crisis, but something more settled, more internal. She thanked the ground crew without looking at them, which told Caleb she was inside her own head. He recognized that state. He lived in it. He'd spent the 2 hours walking, not sightseeing, just moving through the city the way he sometimes moved through problems without trying to solve them, letting his feet go where they went while the back of his mind worked on something it hadn't been asked to work on yet. What had opened up in the blue above the clouds hadn't closed. He'd expected it to. He'd expected the landing, the shutdown sequence, the return to ground level to seal it back up the way it had been sealed for 11 years. He'd expected to feel like himself again, the ground version of himself, the mechanic Owen's dad, the man who had made a decision and stuck to it. Instead, standing on a Washington sidewalk with the city moving around him, he felt like a man who had put on a coat he'd stored in the back of a closet and discovered it still fit perfectly, and now couldn't decide whether that was a comfort or a problem. He was in the cockpit running the pre-departure flow when Victoria came aboard. She stopped in the cockpit doorway. Hendricks was already in the right seat, headset on, working through the before-start checklist with the focused professionalism of a young pilot who had spent the previous 2 hours reconfiguring everything he thought he knew about competence. "Mr. Reed," she said. He didn't look up from the checklist. "We'll be ready in about 12 minutes. I want to talk during the flight. You can use the intercom. I mean in person." She paused. "When you're not flying." He looked up then. She was standing in the doorway with her coat over her arm and her legal pad and the expression of a woman who had spent the afternoon thinking hard and arrived somewhere she hadn't expected. "I cruise at altitude," he said. "Hands stay on the aircraft. After landing. I'll be home by 7. Before you go home." The legal pad came up slightly, the reflex of someone who organized their thinking on paper. "There are things I need you to see, tonight." He held her eyes, measuring again. "What did Sophie find?" he said. She didn't flinch. "Enough." He looked back at the checklist. "Let's get airborne. We'll talk about the rest on the ground." She nodded and moved back into the cabin. Hendricks said very quietly, without looking up from his instruments, "She's not going to make this easy for you." "Nothing worth anything ever is," Caleb said. "Checklist." They flew. The return flight was smoother than the morning departure. The northwest weather had moved through and left behind a clean, cold sky that made for an easy ride at altitude. Hendricks ran the radios with the increased confidence of a man who had spent the morning watching excellence and had calibrated himself up accordingly. Caleb noticed and said nothing about it. Sometimes the best teaching was just showing. Marcus had taught him that. At cruise, the intercom stayed quiet for a long time. Caleb was fine with that. He didn't need to fill silence. He flew and thought and let the sky be what it was. Then, at the 90-minute mark, Sophie's voice came through. Not Victoria's. Sophie's. "Mr. Reed, I apologize for bothering you." "You're not bothering me. I have a number I need you to hear." A pause. "The average base salary for Hale Industries line maintenance staff, the people who service our aircraft between flights." He waited. $31,000 a year, she said. Some of them have been with the company for 7 years. The cockpit was quiet. The chief pilot who collapsed this morning, Sophie continued, and her voice had the careful flatness of someone delivering information they found personally difficult, had filed 3 fatigue reports in the last 6 months, mandatory rest violations. All 3 were acknowledged and not acted on. Caleb's hands stayed perfectly still on the controls. How many aircraft in the fleet? 6. How many have open maintenance write-ups that haven't been cleared? Less? A longer pause. Pages turning or the laptop equivalent. 4 out of 6. 17 open items total. 3 of them are classified as deferred, which means they've been identified as non-critical and postponed. Who classified them as non-critical? The chief pilot. The chief pilot who's in the hospital. Yes. Hendricks was looking straight ahead at his instruments. His jaw was tight. Sophie, Caleb said. Yes. Tell me about the pilot training records. The pause this time was the longest yet. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. The voice of someone who has found something they wished they hadn't and can't put it back. Simulator hours are running about 60% of the required annual minimum. 3 of our 8 active pilots are overdue for instrument currency checks. One of them, she stopped, started again. One of them last flew an actual instrument approach in IMC 14 months ago. BEMI. IMC, Instrument Meteorological Conditions. The clouds, the gray. The world where the only thing between you and the ground was a pilot who knew what they were doing and instruments they trusted. 14 months, Caleb said. Yes. And he's still flying passengers. Silence. Yes, Sophie said. Caleb took a breath, let it out through his nose, the kind of breath that was doing structural work. All right, he said. I'll look at everything tonight. He clicked off the intercom. Hendricks said, still staring at his instruments. Is it that bad everywhere? Worse some places, Caleb said. Better others. He adjusted their descent profile marginally. It's what happens when the people who fly the planes and the people who count the money don't speak the same language. Eventually, something gets lost in translation. What gets lost? Caleb looked out at the late afternoon sky, going orange at the horizon, where the sun was dropping. The part where losing hurts. Hendricks absorbed that. They began the descent. The wheels touched down at Hargrove Aviation at 6:02 p.m. Caleb taxied the aircraft to its position, ran the shutdown, verified every system, and signed the aircraft off the way. He signed off. Every aircraft completely accurately. Nothing deferred. That shouldn't be. Then he climbed out of the cockpit for the second time that day. His coveralls still had the hydraulic fluid stain from that morning. The one that had been visible when Victoria Hale sized him up in the hangar and made her calculation. He thought about that stain briefly and decided it was fine. It was honest. Victoria was waiting in the cabin with Franklin and Sophie. The 2 other suited associates had stayed in Washington for reasons Caleb hadn't asked about. The cabin had the end-of-day quality of a room where serious people have been working for a long time. She stood when he came through the cockpit door. I have a conference room upstairs. The building's quiet this time of evening. I told you I need to be home by 7. It's 6 o'clock. Then we have an hour. He looked at her. I'm not going to be impressed by the conference room. I know that, she said. The conference room was on the 3rd floor of Hargrove's main operations building. Caleb had been in it exactly once for an orientation meeting 4 years ago. It had a long table and windows that overlooked the flight line and a presentation screen that Sophie had already connected to her laptop. Caleb sat down, pushed the chair back from the table, crossed his arms and said, "Show me." Sophie showed him. And for 48 minutes, he went through everything she'd pulled. Maintenance records, safety reports, training logs, compensation data. incident reports that had been filed internally and not escalated, near-miss documentation from 2 years prior involving a pressurization warning at altitude that had been attributed to a sensor malfunction and closed without a deeper investigation into the hydraulic system that Caleb, looking at the write-up for 90 seconds, believed had been the actual root cause. Victoria sat across the table and watched him read. She'd been watching people read documents her whole career. She knew what it looked like when someone was performing comprehension and what it looked like when someone was actually inside the information moving through it, the way water moved through terrain following the logic, finding the low points, pooling where the problems lived. Caleb was inside it. At the 40-minute mark, he set down the last page. Silence. Franklin looked at Victoria. She didn't look back. She was watching Caleb. The pressurization incident, Caleb said. 2 years ago, aircraft 4. Yes. The sensor didn't fail. Victoria's jaw shifted. The investigation concluded. The sensor read what it read because the outflow valve was cycling inconsistently. You can see it in the data if you pull the flight data recorder readout from that flight and compare it against the valve position log. He leaned forward and set his finger on the incident report. Whoever wrote this up didn't pull those two data sources together. They took the most available explanation and closed it out. Victoria looked at Sophie. Sophie was already typing. That aircraft is still flying, Franklin said. Yes, Caleb said. Is it safe? Victoria said. He looked at her. I don't know. I'd need to inspect it. But I can tell you the investigation that said it was safe was incomplete, which means the conclusion is unreliable. The table held that for a moment. What else? Victoria said. Her voice was flat, not defensive, the flatness of a person who has decided they want the full truth and is removing everything that might muffle it. Your deferred maintenance items. 3 of them are non-critical on paper. 2 of them I'd want someone to look at more carefully. The avionics discrepancy on aircraft 2 and the breakware indicator on aircraft 6. He looked at the table. The breakware 1 particularly. That's not a defer item. That's a fix before next flight item, and someone made a call I wouldn't have made. Who made the call? Whoever signed off on it. He pushed the papers back. Which brings me to your maintenance staff. Victoria was still. 31,000 a year, he said. 7-year employees. I know. Do you? It wasn't a question. It had the particular quality of a statement that was actually a challenge delivered without heat, which made it harder to deflect than anger would have been. I'm telling you I know because Sophie just told me, she said, and there was for the first time something beneath the control. Not quite shame. The cousin of shame that arrives before shame does when a person realizes they should have known something and didn't because they never thought to ask. People doing safety-critical work for $31,000 a year in this economy, Caleb said, are not people who feel valued enough to be fully invested in catching every problem. That's not a moral judgment. That's physics. You get what you pay for, and the variable you're underpaying on happens to be the one that stands between your passengers and the ground. Franklin had his hands folded on the table. He was looking at them. Victoria said, "What would you do?" "About which part?" "All of it." Caleb looked at the conference room window. The flight line was dark now, the aircraft lit by ground lighting, the G700 visible in its parking position. He could see from here the outline of the aircraft he'd flown twice today. The aircraft he'd climbed into because a woman had laughed at him and he'd made a decision that he still wasn't entirely sure he understood. "I'd start with the deferred items," he said. "Aircraft 4 and 6 come out of service until someone with actual expertise reviews them, not paperwork review physical inspection." He looked back at her. "I'd review every pilot's currency and pull anyone who doesn't meet minimums from the flight schedule until they've completed current training. That's going to create coverage problems. I have 12 scheduled flights in the next 3 weeks. Then you have a problem to solve. I'm asking you what to solve it with. Prioritize. Cancel the ones that can be canceled. Delay the ones that can be delayed, for the ones that can't. He thought about it. You have any pilots in the pool who are current and experienced? Hendricks, Sophie offered. Hendricks is good. Who else? Victoria looked at Franklin. Franklin looked at Sophie. Sophie pulled up something on her laptop and named 2 names with their hours and currency status. Caleb listened. Those 2 plus Hendricks can cover your critical flights, he said. The others wait until training's current. And maintenance pay. Bring it to market rate, which in this region for a qualified A&P mechanic is somewhere between 55 and 65 depending on experience. You've got people doing the work for half that. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. That's a significant budget impact. So is an accident, he said. The conference room went very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happened when something true had been said too clearly to argue with. I know, she said. He looked at her, not challenging now, something more level. The chief pilot who collapsed this morning. Dave Caruso. He's stable. They're saying it was cardiac stress-induced. He filed 3 fatigue reports in 6 months. I know that now. Did you know it before? She held his eyes. The honest answer moved across her face before the controlled answer could replace it. He saw both in sequence. She was a person who valued precision enough that lying even to herself cost her something. No, she said. Why not? Because the reporting structure didn't surface it to me. Because the reporting structure was designed to manage upward, not surface problems upward, he said, not unkindly, factually. She looked at the table. Yes, that's the real problem, he said. Not the deferred maintenance items or the training gaps, though those are urgent. The real problem is the culture that produced them, where people who see problems feel like their job is to handle it quietly and not escalate, because escalating creates complications, and complications reflect badly on them. He leaned forward slightly. You've built a machine that's very good at looking fine and not as good at being fine, and the gap between those 2 things is where accidents live. Victoria Hale sat very still. In 20 years of business, people had challenged her strategies, her decisions, her leadership style, her market positions. She had been challenged by competitors, by regulators, by board members, by journalists who thought they'd found something. Nobody had ever sat across a table from her and described the inside of her company in 60 seconds with the accuracy of a diagnostic instrument. Franklin was looking at Caleb now with an expression that was several things at once. Respect, wariness, the particular attention of a man who had spent decades in rooms with powerful people and had just recognized in someone he'd been willing to dismiss 2 hours ago something he needed to take seriously. Mr. Reed, Victoria said. She stopped, gathered something, started again. I want to offer you a position. I figured you might. Director of Flight Operations, oversight of fleet safety maintenance standards, pilot training, and I know what a Director of Flight Operations does, he said. Then you know it's a significant role. She looked at him. The compensation would be, I don't need the number yet. She stopped. Excuse me, the number doesn't matter yet, he said. He looked at her directly. Here's what matters. If I take this role, I'm not a consultant, and I'm not a figurehead. Every safety decision is mine, and it's final. You want to argue about budget impact, you argue with me, and you present actual data, not political pressure. Any pilot or mechanic who raises a safety concern comes to me directly and faces no consequence for it. And the first time someone tries to override a safety decision with a business justification, I'm gone. The room waited. Those aren't negotiable, he said. Victoria looked at Franklin. Franklin looked back at her, and his expression said very clearly that he was not going to be the one to weigh in on this. She looked back at Caleb. You've been in this building for 48 minutes, and you're already setting terms. You invited me to the table, he said. This is what I look like at a table. Sure. Something shifted in her expression. Not concession adjustment. The recalibration of a person who is accustomed to having a read on everyone in the room and has just discovered that her read on this particular person has been wrong in every direction since 6:47 this morning. I'll need 24 hours, she said. That's fair. You'll have my answer by tomorrow evening. He stood. I need to call my son. She stood too. Mr. Reed. He paused. I want you to know, and I'm not saying this as a business gesture, I want you to know that what I said in the hangar this morning was beneath me. I knew it the moment the laughter died, and you didn't back down. She held his eyes. I've been wrong about things in my career. I'm not sure I've been wrong about a person as completely as I was wrong about you in about 30 seconds. He looked at her for a moment. You weren't entirely wrong, he said. She frowned. What do you mean? You saw a man in coveralls who you thought couldn't do the thing you needed done. You were wrong about the man, but you weren't wrong to need the thing done. You've got a safety operation that needs someone who knows what they're doing. He looked at the conference room window, the dark flight line beyond it. The hangar this morning was arrogant, but the problem is real. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. I'll wait for your call, he said. He walked out of the conference room, down the stairs, through the building, and out into the cold April evening. The flight line was quiet. The G700 sat in its parking position, covered for the night, its day's work done. Caleb stood in the dark and breathed the cold air and took out his phone. Owen picked up on the second ring. Dad, it's 7:04. I know. Traffic. Mrs. Patterson made hot dogs. How are they? Fine. Ketchup only. Good man. He looked up at the night sky. Clear now, the weather long gone, stars visible between the cloud gaps. He could see without trying the constellation of lights that told him something about the wind and the pressure and the way the air was moving. He'd always been able to do that. He'd just stopped paying attention. Owen. Yeah. You know how you asked me what I did today? I said a work thing. A pause. Yeah. It was a little more than that. Owen was quiet. The particular quiet of a 9-year-old processing that there is more of his father to know than he currently knows. Are you okay? Yeah? Caleb said. I'm okay. He thought about the descent into Reagan, the blue above the clouds. Marcus's voice saying the aircraft always knows something you don't. I want to tell you about it tonight, when I get home. All of it. Some of it. The rest when you're older. Is it about flying? The stars above the flight line. The cold April air. The sealed room in him that had come open at 31,000 feet and refused to close. Yeah, he said. It's about flying. He heard Owen exhale. Not surprised, not confused. Something else. Like a piece clicking into place that the boy had always felt hovering somewhere close to where it belonged. Okay, Owen said quietly. I'll be up. I know you will. Caleb started walking toward the parking lot. Don't let Mrs. Patterson leave without the $20 in the kitchen drawer. Already paid her. Good man. Dad? Yeah, whatever it is, Owen said. I'm glad it happened. Caleb stopped walking for just a second. Then he kept going. So am I, bud, he said. So am I. He got in his truck, and as he pulled out of the Hargrove lot and onto the dark suburban road toward home, the thing that had opened in him at altitude was still open, still moving air, still doing something he didn't have a name for. But it didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a window. And outside the window, somewhere between the stars and the flight line, and a 9-year-old who had already paid the babysitter and was staying up to hear the story, something was becoming clear that had been dark for 11 years. He drove. The road was empty, and the night was cold, and the stars said the same thing they always said, if you knew how to read them. He was starting to read them again. He told Owen some of it that night. Not all of it. Not Marcus. Not the classified missions, or the aircraft with no designation, or the morning 11 years ago, when everything changed. Just the shape of it, enough for a 9-year-old to hold without it being too heavy. He told Owen that he used to fly for the Air Force, that he'd flown very fast aircraft for a long time, and that today someone had needed a pilot, and he'd been the closest one. Owen sat on the end of his bed in his pajamas, with the paper airplane on the nightstand. A 1940s P-51 Mustang he'd folded from a full-color printout of a photograph he'd found in a library book, detailed enough that the shark mouth nose art was visible on the paper, and he listened to every word without interrupting. Which was the quality Caleb loved most in his son. The boy knew how to actually listen. Not wait to talk listening. Real listening. Attention as a form of respect. When Caleb finished, Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Were you scared?" "No," Caleb said. Then he reconsidered, because Owen always knew when he was rounding off. "Not of the flying. Something else." "What?" Caleb looked at the paper airplane, remembering that I was good at it. Owen thought about this with the focused seriousness of a person for whom thinking was not performative. Why would that be scary? Because when you stop doing something you were good at, you make a kind of peace with not having it anymore. And then if it turns out you could have had it all along. He stopped. He hadn't articulated this before. It was forming in real time. It's like finding out a door you thought was locked was open the whole time. "That doesn't sound scary," Owen said. "That sounds good." "It is," Caleb said. "It's also a little hard." "Because of the person you lost." Caleb went still. Owen looked at him steadily. "I heard you say his name once, when you were on the phone before I was supposed to be awake. Marcus." He said it carefully, like a word he'd been holding in storage. "You never told me about him." 11 years. Caleb had kept that name out of every conversation in this house for 11 years, and his 9-year-old son had been storing it, waiting patient as stone. "Marcus was my friend," Caleb said. "Was he a pilot too? The best one I ever flew with?" "What happened to him?" "The nightstand, the paper airplane, the yellow lamplight." Owen's face open and waiting, and the understanding behind his eyes that was too old for 9 and had been there since he was a baby, this particular quality of seeing his father clearly. "He died," Caleb said. "On a mission. I was flying lead." He stopped. He wasn't going to do all of this tonight. Not yet. "It's a long story. I'll tell you the rest when you're older." "Deed." Owen nodded. He accepted this the way he accepted most things Caleb gave him completely without pushing for more. Then he picked up the paper airplane and turned it in his hands. "I think you should take the job," he said. Caleb looked at him. "I haven't told you there's a job." "There's a job," Owen said. "You've got your deciding face on." Caleb laughed. It came out surprised, which was the best kind. "My deciding face. You get very still, and you look at things that aren't there." Owen set the airplane back on the nightstand. "It's kind of obvious." Caleb shook his head slowly. This kid. This extraordinary quiet kid who'd come into his life when he was 35 and single and barely holding himself together, and had somehow, without trying, put him back together just by needing him. "Go to sleep," he said. "Take the job, Dad. Go to sleep." He turned off the lamp and sat on the edge of the bed until Owen's breathing slowed and went even. Then he sat a little longer in the dark with the paper airplane and the deciding face and the open door. He picked up his phone. He didn't call Victoria Hale. He called a number he hadn't called in 4 years. It rang 5 times and he almost hung up. Then, Reed. The voice was gravel and authority, and a particular brand of warmth that military men of a certain generation expressed by not showing it. "You still alive out there?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said. You. Old and ornery. What time is it? 11:15. I'm sorry. Don't be. I don't sleep before midnight anyway. Doctor says it's blood pressure. I say it's character. A pause. A shift. The sound of a man who had spent 40 years reading the purpose behind a call and was now reading this one. What happened? General Raymond Kowalski retired. Former commanding officer, 8th Flight Test Squadron, Edwards Air Force Base. The man who had recruited Caleb into the test pilot program 22 years ago watched him become one of the best in a program full of extraordinary people, and then quietly, without ceremony, signed his honorable discharge papers on a February morning in 2014. Because he understood that the man sitting across the desk from him was breaking apart and needed to be let go before he broke completely. Caleb had called him 3 times in 11 years. Once when Owen was born. Once when Owen had a hospital scare at age 4 pneumonia. 3 days of ICU, the worst 72 hours of Caleb's life. And once 2 years ago, just to talk, which neither of them acknowledged was unusual, and both of them understood was necessary. I flew today, Caleb said. Silence. A G700, Caleb said. Long story involving a CEO and a collapsed pilot and a government meeting. I flew the aircraft. Captain's seat. How'd it feel? Caleb was quiet. That's your answer right there, Kowalski said. I got offered a director of flight operations position. The company has problems, real ones, safety gaps, culture issues, people doing critical work for poverty wages. He paused. I told her I'd fix it, or I'd leave. Sounds like something you'd say. The general's voice shifted, not softer, just more direct, the way a man got when he was deciding to stop circling and say the thing. Reed, you've been needing a reason for 11 years. I had a reason. Owen. Owen's a purpose, not the same thing. A pause. The boy needs his father. He also needs to grow up watching his father be fully alive. Those two things aren't in conflict. You've been treating them like they are. Caleb pressed his fingers against his eyes. The same gesture Victoria had made on the aircraft, he realized. Maybe it was a universal human thing, what you did when the truth was pushing on the back of your eyes from the inside. There's something else, he said. I know. No. There's something specific. About Marcus. He stopped, started again. I've carried it for 11 years, and I need you to tell me something. The phone was quiet. On the other end, he heard Kowalski breathe. The specific quality of breath that was not inattention, but its opposite, the full presence of a man who has been waiting for a call for 11 years and is now making sure he receives it correctly. Ask, Kowalski said. The aircraft, Caleb said. His aircraft. The mechanical report, the final one, not the preliminary. I was discharged before the final report was completed. I never requested it. I didn't. He stopped. His voice was doing something he didn't give it permission to do. He steadied it. I never asked because I didn't want to know. Because I was certain it was pilot error, and I was certain it was my call that put him in the position where the error was possible. Caleb, let me finish. He pressed through it. I've been carrying the assumption that I killed my best friend by flying lead on a mission profile that pushed us both to the edge, and that when the edge came, he fell, and I didn't. That's what I've been living with, for 11 years. And I need you to tell me if I'm right. The phone was quiet for so long that Caleb thought the connection had dropped. Then Kowalski said, no. One word. The whole weight of 11 years balanced against one word. No, Caleb said. The final accident investigation report, Kowalski said, and his voice had changed. It was the voice of a man speaking words. He has carried a long time himself, held in trust, waiting for the right moment to deliver them. Hydraulic actuator failure. Port Elevon. It was a manufacturing defect in a component that had passed every inspection because the failure mode was internal microscopic fracture in the casting that only propagated under the specific temperature differentials at that altitude and airspeed combination. Caleb's hand was tight around the phone. Nobody caught it, Kowalski said. Nobody could have caught it with the inspection protocols that existed at that time. The failure was in the component before it was ever installed on the aircraft. He paused. After the investigation, the manufacturer issued a recall on 600 components across 3 airframes. The protocol was changed. Every aircraft in the program was retrofitted. Another pause. It was not your call that killed Marcus. It was a fracture in a casting that no one in that hangar, in that program, in that branch of the United States military could have seen coming. The kitchen of Caleb Reed's house at 11:23 at night, in a suburb 40 minutes outside Chicago, was very quiet. "You knew," Caleb said. His voice came out strange to his own ears. "You had the final report before I was discharged." "Yes." "You didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" And there was something in that single syllable, not accusation, something rawer than accusation. The question of a man who needed to understand why he'd been allowed to carry something that wasn't his. "Because," Kowalski said slowly, with the weight of a man who has thought about this answer for 11 years, "you weren't ready to hear it. I know how that sounds. I've thought about whether I was right for every one of those 11 years. But you came into that discharge meeting, Caleb, and you were—" He stopped. "You had already decided. You had already convicted yourself and sentenced yourself. And there was no argument in the world I could have made in that room that you would have received. You would have heard me tell you it wasn't your fault, and you would have nodded and walked out and kept believing it was." Caleb said nothing. "I kept the report," Kowalski said. "I've had it in a drawer for 11 years waiting for the call where you were ready to actually receive it. And here you are, telling me you flew today, telling me something opened up, telling me you're standing in front of a door." A pause. "Are you ready to receive it now?" The paper airplane was in Owen's room. The deciding face, the open door. Caleb put his back against the kitchen wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor. He didn't plan to do this. His body just did it, gave out in the specific way of a structure that has been under tension for 11 years and has just had the load removed. "Yeah," he said. His voice was barely a voice. "Yeah, I'm ready. It wasn't your fault," Kowalski said. Clearly. Directly. No softening. "Marcus Reyes died because of a manufacturing defect that existed before you both climbed into those aircraft. Your mission profile was within parameters. Your calls were sound. Your flying was—" He paused, and something moved through the old man's voice that was not military in any way, that was just human. "Your flying was extraordinary, Caleb. It always was. You saved an aircraft that day that should have gone down with his. The investigation noted it. The program noted it. I noted it." He paused. "Marcus would have told you the same thing." And there it was. 11 years. Caleb Reed sat on the kitchen floor at 11:23 at night and came apart quietly, the way men of his particular construction came apart, without making much noise, without drama. Just a deep and total releasing of something that had been held so long it had become structural. And now that it was gone, everything had to redistribute and settle into a new configuration. Bonsoir. He didn't try to stop it. He didn't manage it or contain it. For the first time in 11 years, he let it be what it was. Kowalski stayed on the line. He didn't speak. He didn't offer comfort or platitude. He just stayed, which was exactly the right thing, which was why he'd been one of the best commanding officers Caleb had ever served under. After a while, he didn't know how long, Caleb pulled himself back together, piece by piece, the way he rebuilt aircraft, carefully, correctly, making sure everything that went back was properly connected before he moved to the next piece. "Sir," he said. "Still here. I'm going to take the job." "Good. And I'm going to need—" He stopped. This was harder to say. "I'm going to need the report. The final accident report. I need to read it." "I'll overnight it tomorrow morning," Kowalski said. "It's been packed and ready for a year." Caleb closed his eyes. A year. I had a feeling, the general said. Simply, without apology. You know how it is. You can read the weather before it arrives. Caleb almost laughed. Almost. Yeah, he said. I know how that is. Read. Sir, he would be proud of you. Not for today, though. Today was... The general made a sound that was as close as he got to emotional. Not just for today. For Owen. For 11 years of showing up for that boy. Marcus knew you. He knew what kind of man you were. He would not be surprised, and he would not be grateful, because he'd say you were just doing what was obvious. A pause. But he'd be proud. Caleb leaned his head back against the wall. Above him in the bedroom, Owen was sleeping with a paper P-51 on his nightstand, and the quiet certainty of a kid who trusted his father completely. Thank you, Caleb said, for keeping it. Thank you, Kowalski said, for finally asking. They said goodbye the way they always said goodbye, briefly, without ceremony, with the particular affection of men who expressed it by not needing to. Caleb sat on the kitchen floor for another 10 minutes. Then he got up. He got up the way he got up from everything, completely without looking back at the floor, with the forward intention of a man who has processed something and is now moving. He went to his desk. He sat down. He took out a piece of paper, actual paper, not a screen, and wrote 3 things. He wrote Aircraft 4 and 6 inspection. He wrote maintenance pay restructure. He wrote training currency immediate audit. Then he sat for a moment and wrote a 4th thing smaller at the bottom of the page. Not for Victoria Hale or Hale Industries or the Director of Flight Operations position. He wrote, for Marcus. Do it right. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his chest street. His phone buzzed. A text, not a call. Victoria Hale's number, which Sophie had put in his phone before he left the conference room. The text said, I've been going through the records again. You were right about the pressurization incident on Aircraft 4. My team confirmed the outflow valve. We're pulling it from service tonight. He read it twice. Then he typed back, good call. I'll have a full assessment to you by Friday. 3 dots appeared. Then, I haven't formally offered you the job yet. He typed, you will. The dots again. Then, after a pause, yes, I will. Yeah. He set the phone down and looked at the kitchen. The ordinary kitchen of a man who had lived small on purpose for 11 years by choice, by conviction, by the particular self-imposed poverty of someone who believed they needed to be punished by the size of their own life. It didn't look different. The same counters, the same old coffee maker, the same crayon drawing Owen had made at age 6, still held to the fridge by a magnet shaped like an Illinois license plate. A drawing of 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of something that was ambiguously either a house or an airplane. Caleb had never asked which it was. He liked not knowing, but the kitchen felt different, the same way the cockpit had felt different when the engines came to life at Hargrove that morning. Not new. Restored. The way a thing felt when it had been returned to the purpose it was built for. He went to check on Owen. His son was deeply asleep, one arm thrown over the edge of the bed, in the particular boneless grace of a sleeping child. The paper airplane on the nightstand caught the hallway light. The shark-mouth Mustang folded with the precision of a boy who cared about getting things right. Caleb stood in the doorway and looked at him for a long time. He thought about Marcus, not the way he usually thought about him. The guilt version, the weight version, the inventory of everything Caleb had decided he owed the world in exchange for walking away from the sky that Marcus hadn't. He thought about Marcus the way you thought about someone you loved. The laugh, the gloves. The aircraft always knows something you don't. The phone call from the debriefing room. Only took you 2 years slow. The way he'd talked about flying, not like a job or a skill, but like a relationship, like something that required honesty and attention, and the willingness to be surprised. He thought, I'm going to fly again. and I'm going to do it the way you taught me. He thought I'm sorry it took this long. He thought I think you knew it would. Buttle. He went to bed at 12:47. He lay in the dark and the house was quiet, and the sky outside the window was clear. And for the first time in 11 years, Caleb Reed fell asleep without the specific weight that had been living in his chest since a February morning in 2014, when a phone call changed the shape of everything. It was not entirely gone. It would never be entirely gone. Some things that happen to you become part of your structure, not damage, not wound, just load-bearing. Part of what holds you up. But he could breathe around it now. That was new. That was everything. His phone buzzed one more time before he slept. A text from a number he didn't recognize, which resolved when he read the name at the top: D. Hendricks. It said, "Mr. Reed, I looked up your service record tonight. I won't pretend I wasn't going to. I just want to say it was an honor to fly with you today. Whatever you decide to do next." Caleb read it, set the phone on the nightstand, looked at the ceiling. Then he typed back in the dark, one-handed, eyes half closed. "You ran good radios, Hendricks. Keep that up." He put the phone down. He closed his eyes. The house was quiet. Owen was sleeping. Somewhere 30 miles east, a G700 sat in a hangar grounded for inspection, finally getting the attention it was owed. And Caleb Reed, for the first time in 11 years, had nothing left to run from. The night was still. The window was open. And outside, the sky was full of stars. Victoria Hale called at 8:14 the next morning. But Caleb was in the middle of making Owen's eggs, actual scrambled eggs this time, not granola bar negotiations, when the phone lit up on the counter. He looked at it, looked at the pan, turned the heat down, and answered. "I've made a decision," she said. No preamble, no good morning. This was how she operated, and he'd already adjusted to it. "All right," he said. "Your terms, all of them." A pause, not hesitation, but the pause of someone who has spent the night working through something and wants to be precise about what they arrived at. Safety decisions are yours, and they're final. Any mechanic or pilot who raises a concern comes directly to you with full protection. Budget arguments come with data, or they don't come at all. Another pause. I had Franklin run the numbers on the maintenance pay restructure last night. It's significant, but it's manageable. We're doing it. Caleb watched the eggs. When? I want you in the office Monday. We'll announce internally Tuesday. I need Friday first. For what? Aircraft 4 inspection. I want to be there myself. A beat of silence. Then, you haven't started yet and you're already in my hangars. You want it done right, or you want it done after Monday? She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Friday, she said. Aircraft 4. I'll have Sophie send access. One more thing, he said. Of course there is. Hendricks. I want him as my primary captain. He's good, and he's going to be better. I want him in the right seat for the government demonstration flight. The silence this time was longer. That flight has significant visibility, Caleb. Unshay. She'd used his first name. He noted it without showing it. I know what it has. Hendricks can handle it. And he needs to see that someone believes he can before he'll fully believe it himself. He flipped the eggs. That's how you build a culture. You put the right people in the right seats, and you tell them you trust them before they've finished earning it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, Monday, she said. Don't be late. I'm never late. He heard something in the background on her end. Sophie's voice low and efficient. Then Victoria, before she hung up. Reed, for what it's worth, I looked at your service record properly last night, not just the summary. A pause. I won't pretend I had any idea what I was looking at in that hangar yesterday. No, he said. You didn't. I'm not going to apologize again. You told me it was done. It is. But I want you to know I don't take lightly what you did, yesterday or before yesterday. Her voice was direct and unornamented. No performance in it. Marcus Reyes. I read about the incident. I'm sorry. The kitchen was quiet. The eggs were done. Thank you, he said, meaning it. They hung up. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway, in his school clothes hair, still doing 3 different things at once, backpack already on. He looked at the eggs, then at his father's face. You took the job, he said. Eat your eggs. Owen sat down with the particular satisfaction of a kid who is never surprised when he's right. I knew it, he said. You knew nothing. Eat. I knew, Owen said cheerfully, pulling the plate toward him. You had the face. Caleb sat down across from him and drank his coffee and watched his son eat eggs and thought about the accident report that was being overnighted from a general's desk in San Antonio and about Aircraft 4 sitting in a hangar 30 miles east and about a government demonstration flight that was 6 weeks out and about a young first officer named Hendricks who ran good radios and was going to be somebody worth watching. He thought about all of it and felt something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Ready. He felt ready. The accident report arrived Thursday afternoon. FedEx. A large envelope heavier than it looked the physical weight of a government investigation running to 112 pages. Appendices, photographs, data readouts, technical analyses. Kowalski had included a handwritten note on his personal stationery. 3 lines. Read it all. Then put it down. Then go fly. Signed with his rank out of habit, which made Caleb smile in a way that hurt and felt good at the same time. He read it at the kitchen table after Owen was in bed. All of it. Every page. He read the technical analysis of the hydraulic actuator failure, the material science report on the casting fracture, the flight data recorder readout that showed Marcus's aircraft responding normally at altitude, and then in a span of 1.3 seconds, not responding at all. He read the investigation board's conclusion, unambiguous, carefully worded, the language of people who understood the weight of what they were writing. No pilot error, no mission profile violation, no decision made by any human being in any cockpit on that day that contributed to the outcome. He read his own name in the report in the section that assessed the lead pilot's response to the emergency. The language was formal and precise, and said in the measured vocabulary of military aviation accident investigation that the lead pilot had done everything correctly, that the lead pilot's airmanship under the conditions created by the emergency was notable, that the lead pilot's aircraft should by the data profile also have been lost and was not, because of decisions made in a span of seconds, that the investigation board considered exceptional. He read that section 3 times. Then he set the report down on the kitchen table and put both hands flat on it and breathed. It wasn't absolution exactly. Absolution implied a sin, and the report was clear that there had been no sin. It was something else. The technical documented formally investigated confirmation that the story he had told himself for 11 years, the story where he was, the reason, the cause, the fault line was not the true story, had never been the true story. The true story was a microscopic fracture in a casting. The true story was a failure mode that no inspection protocol in existence could have caught. The true story was that Marcus Reyes died not because Caleb Reed made a wrong call, but because a piece of metal failed in a way that pieces of metal occasionally catastrophically fail, and that Caleb Reed flew out of it and came home and was alive and had spent 11 years treating that survival as a debt he could never repay. He thought about what Kowalski had said. He would not be surprised, but he'd be proud. He thought about Marcus pre-flighting in the dark before a dawn launch, humming something under his breath, checking every surface with the particular attention of a man who understood that the difference between confidence and recklessness was exactly this: the willingness to check everything, trust nothing assumed, verify what you believed you already knew. He thought, I'm going to do it that way, every time. He picked up the report and put it in a drawer. Not the back of a drawer, he wasn't hiding it. Just putting it where things he'd finished with went. Where things that were processed and done and no longer needed to be carried lived. He closed the drawer. He went to bed. He slept. Friday, Aircraft 4. Caleb arrived at Hale Industries' main maintenance facility at 7 in the morning, which was 30 minutes before anyone expected him. Which meant the shift supervisor, a 20-year man named Gerald, who had the look of someone who had been told a new director was coming, and had decided to reserve judgment until shown cause to do. Otherwise found him already in the hangar with the access panel open when he walked in at 7:30. Gerald stopped. Looked at the open panel. Looked at Caleb. Looked at the coveralls, because Caleb had worn coveralls, not a director's business casual, because he was there to inspect an aircraft, not hold a meeting. "You're Reed," Gerald said. "Yes." "You're not supposed to be here until 8. "I know." Caleb didn't look up from the outflow valve assembly he was examining. "You're Gerald Marsh. 22 years at this facility. Your write-up on the pressurization incident 2 years ago was the one that flagged the sensor. You were right about the symptom. Whoever closed it out missed the underlying cause." He looked up. "That wasn't your fault. You flagged what you saw. The problem was the investigation didn't go deep enough." Gerald stood very still. "How do you know my write-up?" Sophie pulled the records. Caleb reached back into the panel with a flashlight. "I read everything before I come to a job. Force of habit." He found what he was looking for. Said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come look at this." Gerald crossed the hangar floor. He crouched next to Caleb and looked where the flashlight pointed. At the outflow valve actuator. At the specific point where the cycling irregularity had been originating for, based on the wear pattern approximately 18 months. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, "Son of a..." "Yeah," Caleb said. "I wrote that up twice. Both times it came back cleared." "I know." "Who cleared it?" "Dave Caruso." Gerald said it flatly. Not to throw anyone under anything, the man was in a hospital recovering from cardiac surgery. Just the fact. "Dave was trying to keep the aircraft flying," Caleb said. "I understand that pressure. It's the wrong call, but I understand where it comes from." He pulled the flashlight back. "This aircraft needs a new actuator and a full outflow system inspection before it goes back in the air. Today, if possible. I can have a new actuator in by end of day." "Good." Caleb stood. "What else on this airframe?" Gerald looked at him. Something shifting in his assessment, the specific reassessment of a man who has been in a trade long enough to recognize in about 4 minutes whether someone who walks into his shop actually knows the trade. "How much time do you have?" "As much as it takes," Caleb said. Gerald almost smiled. "All right," he said. "Let me get my guys." For 6 hours, Caleb moved through Aircraft 4 with Gerald and 2 of his senior mechanics, a woman named Tasha, who had 12 years of experience and the focused efficiency of someone who was excellent at her job and had never been particularly recognized for it, and a quiet man named Roy, who didn't say much but had hands that worked with the particular confidence of deep expertise. They went through every system. They found the actuator issue confirmed. It ordered the part. They found a secondary hydraulic line showing the early stages of wear that had 2 more inspection cycles before it became urgent but needed documentation. They found a minor avionics discrepancy in the nav system that matched the notation Caleb had flagged in the logs 3 days earlier on the G700. Every finding went on paper. Every paper went into the aircraft's maintenance record. Every entry signed and dated and legible, because a maintenance record that couldn't be read was a legal document with a hole in it. At 1 in the afternoon, Gerald's crew broke for lunch. Tasha and Roy went to the break room. Gerald stayed leaning against the workbench watching Caleb finish his notes. "Can I say something?" Gerald said. "Go ahead." "I've had 3 directors of operations in the last 7 years. He paused. The first one came through once a quarter for a walkthrough that lasted 45 minutes and consisted mostly of looking at his phone. The second one was here more often but didn't know which end of a wrench to use, so everything was just management speak. We'd nod and then do what we knew was right anyway. He paused again. The third one that was Dave, and Dave knew aircraft, but he also knew what the business side wanted to hear, and those two things pulled against each other until... He stopped. Until Dave was filing fatigue reports that nobody acted on, Caleb said. Yeah, and you've been watching all of this. We've all been watching all of this. And writing things up, and watching them get cleared, and continuing to show up every day because the work matters even when the structure doesn't support it. Caleb looked at him. That's what you and Tasha and Roy have been doing for how long? Gerald thought about it. A while, he said. That changes Monday, Caleb said. Every write-up gets a response. Every flag gets investigated. You escalate to me directly, not through 4 layers of management directly. And if something is wrong, it comes out of service. I don't care what's scheduled. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. You're going to have fights about that. I know. With people who have a lot more institutional weight than a maintenance crew. I know that too. Caleb capped his pen. I've flown aircraft that weren't supposed to be airworthy and made them airworthy by the quality of the work that went into them. I've also seen what happens when someone cuts the corner that seemed cuttable. He held Gerald's eyes. I'm not going to win every fight, but I'm not going to lose one because I didn't show up for it. Gerald nodded, slowly. The nod of a man who has been in a trade long enough to know the difference between someone who means what they say and someone who is saying what sounds right. Welcome to the facility, Gerald said, and extended his hand. Caleb shook it. The 6 weeks between that Friday and the government demonstration flight were the most concentrated work Caleb had done since his years in the test pilot program. He came in early and stayed late and spent the hours in between in hangars and briefing rooms, and one very loud meeting with Hale Industries' chief financial officer that lasted 90 minutes and ended with the maintenance pay restructure approved at the numbers Caleb had specified, because he had come to that meeting with data salary surveys, turnover cost analyses, incident correlation studies, a 40-page report that Sophie had helped compile, and that Caleb had personally verified every number in, and the CFO, to his credit, was a man who responded to data when it was presented correctly. He restructured the pilot training schedule in week 2. He sat down with every active pilot individually, 8 conversations, each one different, each one honest. Some of them were defensive at first. He didn't fight the defensiveness. He just kept asking questions and listening to answers, and eventually the defensiveness gave way to something more useful, which was honesty about where the gaps were and why they existed and what it would take to close them. The pilot, who was 14 months out of currency for instrument approaches, a 20-year veteran named Price, who Caleb had initially been prepared to be hardest on, turned out to have been asking for simulator time for 8 months and being told the schedule couldn't accommodate it. Caleb had him current within 3 weeks and back on the flight schedule, with a note in his file that said the currency lapse had been an institutional failure, not a pilot failure. Price shook his hand in the hallway after his currency check ride. Didn't expect that, Price said. Expect what? For someone to actually look at what happened instead of just who to pin it on. Pinning doesn't fix anything, Caleb said. Understanding does. Hendricks was in the cockpit with Caleb every chance they could create. Not because Hendricks needed remedial training. He was good, was getting better, was the kind of pilot who improved most rapidly when given actual challenge rather than managed exposure to controlled situations. Caleb challenged him. He put him in the left seat for practice flights and sat in the right and called out problems, not emergencies, but the compound ambiguous, real-world situations that required judgment rather than procedure. He made Hendricks make decisions, and then they talked about the decisions afterward, not to critique, but to build the vocabulary of airmanship that textbooks gestured toward but couldn't fully provide. Yeah. One afternoon, 30 minutes into a training flight, Hendricks said without preamble, "Can I ask you something personal?" Probably. Why'd you stop really? Not the version you give people. The aircraft was level at 12,000 smooth air, no traffic nearby. Caleb watched the horizon. "Because I believed something that wasn't true," he said, "and I built a life around the belief." He paused. "The life wasn't wrong. Owen is—" He stopped because some things didn't need to be completed to be understood. But the foundation of it was a story I told myself that wasn't accurate. About Marcus. Caleb looked at him. Sophie. Sophie. Hendricks confirmed, neither apologetic nor defiant. "I asked her. She told me what she could." "It wasn't my fault," Caleb said. Simple. Direct. The way he'd been practicing saying it, not to perform the healing, but to reinforce it, because saying true things out loud was part of how they became fully true. The final accident report confirmed it. Mechanical failure. Pre-existing defect. "And you didn't know that?" "Not for 11 years. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's 11 years you could have been flying." "Yes." "Are you angry about that?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "I was for about 2 days. Then I thought about Owen, and the 11 years looked different. Not wasted. Spent on something that mattered." He adjusted their heading slightly. "Marcus would have said I was being efficient, getting the fatherhood done early so I could get back to work." Hendricks almost laughed. "Is that actually what he would have said?" "Word for word," Caleb said. "Now watch your altitude. You're 30 feet low." Hendricks corrected immediately. Then quietly, "I'm glad you're back." Caleb said nothing. But he felt it, the particular warmth of being seen by someone who was paying attention and meant what they said. "Watch your altitude," he said again. "I've got it. I've got it." "Then show me you've got it." No, the day of the government demonstration flight arrived on a Tuesday in late May. Caleb drove to the facility in the dark 4:30 in the morning because the pre-flight started at 5:30, and he intended to be through the hangar twice before Hendricks arrived. Owen was asleep when he left. He stood in the doorway of his son's room for 30 seconds. The paper Mustang on the nightstand, the arm over the edge of the bed, the sound of a child sleeping without any weight on him at all. He thought, "Everything I did was for you. And everything I do now is still for you. Those two things are the same thing." He drove. He flew the pre-flight, the way he flew everything, completely without shortcuts, with the attention of a man who understood that attention was not caution, it was respect. Respect for the aircraft, for the people who would be in it, for the work that brought it to this point. Gerald's crew had the aircraft in perfect condition. Tasha caught him running his hand along the port elevon actuator and said, without looking up from her own checklist, "We inspected that assembly yesterday. It's clean." "I know," he said. "I'm just saying hello." Tasha looked up. "To an elevon actuator." "To the part that tells you what the aircraft is thinking," he said. She looked at him for a second. Then she said, "That's either very deep or very weird." "Little of both," he said. She went back to her checklist with something that was almost a smile. Hendricks arrived at 5:50, 20 minutes early, in full uniform, looking like a man who had not slept particularly well and had accepted this as the cost of the day. He found Caleb in the cockpit, running the avionics check. "How are we looking?" Hendricks said, settling into the right seat. "Clean aircraft, good crew, favorable weather." Caleb handed him the checklist card. "How are you looking?" "Good," Hendricks said, then honestly, nervous. "Good," Caleb said. Hendricks blinked. "Good that I'm nervous." Nervous means you understand what's at stake. Pilots who aren't nervous before a high-visibility flight have made a decision about how much they care that I don't trust. He looked at the checklist. Use it. Let it sharpen you. Then put it in a box and fly. Hendricks nodded. He breathed. And then, in the way of someone who has been taught to manage themselves by someone worth learning from, he put it in a box and flew. The passengers boarded at 7:15. Federal officials, 2 agency representatives, Hale Industries senior leadership, including Victoria, who was the last to board, and stopped briefly at the cockpit door. She looked at Caleb, then at Hendricks, then back at Caleb. "Read," she said. "Ms. Hale, 6 weeks ago you were under a citation at my airfield with a hydraulic fluid stain on your arm." "Still have the coveralls," he said. "I know. I've seen you in them." A pause. Something moved across her face, not soft exactly, but real. The face of a woman who had been changed by something and was not pretending otherwise. "Fly safe." "Always," he said. She went to her seat. Hendricks said quietly, "She's different than she was 3 weeks ago. Culture changes from the top down," Caleb said. "She's been watching us change it from the bottom up. Eventually the two meet in the middle." He looked at the checklist. "Checklist." "Starting," Hendricks said. The engines came to life. And in the third row of the cabin, Victoria Hale sat with her legal pad and her pen, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, wrote nothing on it. Just sat with her hands in her lap and felt the aircraft begin to move, and thought about a man who had been invisible in a hangar 6 weeks ago, who she had turned into a punchline, who had answered okay, and walked toward an aircraft and changed quietly, completely without drama, the shape of everything she thought she knew. The runway at Hale Industries facility was long and smooth, and the morning air was clear and cold and perfect. Caleb advanced the throttles. The aircraft accelerated. Hendricks called the speeds V1 rotate, and Caleb pulled back, and the aircraft lifted clean and true, and without hesitation into the May sky. And at 8,000 feet climbing through the broken cloud layer, Caleb found the gap he'd seen developing on the radar and took them through it clean, and above the clouds, the sky opened up into that specific absolute blue that existed nowhere else in the world. The blue he'd seen from the G700 cockpit on the morning this all began. The blue he'd stopped looking for 11 years ago. He leveled off at 33,000 feet. He let the aircraft settle into cruise, and then quietly, not for Hendricks, not for the intercom, just for himself and for the sky, and for a man who had once told him that the aircraft always knew something you didn't, he said, "All right, Jinx, let's go." And he flew. Not to prove anything to the woman in the back of the aircraft, not to answer the crowd in the hangar who had laughed and then gone silent. Not to earn anything or recover anything or demonstrate to any human being alive what he was capable of. He flew because he was a pilot, because the sky had held his grief for 11 years and not let it go to waste. Because a 9-year-old boy with a paper Mustang on his nightstand deserved a father who was fully alive. Because Gerald and Tasha and Roy had done the work that made this aircraft safe, and that work deserved to take flight. Because Hendricks was in the right seat calling out altitudes with the voice of a pilot, becoming the best version of what he was always supposed to be. Because the accident report was in a drawer at home, filed and finished, and no longer load-bearing. Because the guilt was gone, replaced by something cleaner and stronger and more true. He flew because Marcus had taught him how, and the best way to honor a teacher was to do the thing they taught you, and do it right, and keep doing it for as long as the sky would have you. The aircraft held course. The engines ran clean. The horizon was clear from wall to wall. Caleb Reed, 44 years old, single father, aircraft mechanic, Air Force test pilot, director of flight operations, friend of Marcus Reyes, father of Owen Mann, who had spent 11 years on the ground, and one morning in a hangar being laughed at by someone who didn't know what she was looking at, flew. He had not quit. He had only waited. And now, at 33,000 feet on a Tuesday in late May, with the best blue in the world outside the windscreen, and a good crew beside him, and a life that had reorganized itself around the truth instead of the guilt, he was exactly, finally, completely where he was always meant to be. Some men broke under the weight of loss and stayed broken. Caleb Reed bent and held and waited and came back. That was not a small thing. That was everything.